Hey there, guys. So, as you know, we've had a lot of new lightsabers thrust upon us between what we've seen in The Rise of Skywalker with both of Rey's really cool lightsabers and Leia's lightsaber, which I need more than the sustenance of air itself, and the Darksaber on The Mandalorian more than recently. I'm going to need some money to fund these things. I mean, the only place we're going to be able to get them is Galaxy's Edge, so I figured, I'd open up an eBay account, sell some things that I don't really need very much anymore. Here, let's take a look at them. Here we've got a human skeleton, it's used and worn out a little bit, but, people have their collections, people have what they need. I can make it my own skeleton if it means me getting the Darksaber, I promise. I will pair in the heart and the stomach a jar of farts, which it's actually a pretty good deal because you're getting several farts, none of which are my own because since I'm giving up my organs, I've been semi-constipated for a long time. So, it's someone else's farts, but I promise you they are the high quality that you expect when you buy a jar of farts on eBay. And last but not least, we have my diploma from college, which is going to be just as useful to you as it is to me. This Darksaber better release. I'm going to be skinnier than I've ever been if I'm giving up my bones and my organs. My soul I sold a while ago, so you're not going to be able to get that one, unfortunately. It wasn't a very good deal either. The person used a coupon. The spoiler chain has been lifted. I have reviewed every single episode of season 1 of The Mandalorian thus far, and I have not uttered a spoiler in any of them except for kind of minor Baby Yoda ones, because if I didn't mention him at some point, it would have been impossible to talk about this show at all. I would have been like, The Mandalorian does stuff, and then he does some more stuff, and there's someone with him, And the way that he blew up on the internet, there was just no way of avoiding this little guy right here. So I am more than happy, though, to talk about kind of this season as a general whole. First of all, it was obvious that I loved it. I think it's pretty unanimous that this show is the breath of fresh air that Star Wars needed. Whether or not you liked The Rise of Skywalker, I think that it's time for us to deviate away from that main saga of storytelling. There's so much stuff in this huge galaxy that we can explore. So I am just all in on whatever ride they're going to take us, if any of it is like this, and the quality that we've been given. Now, I think the thing with The Mandalorian, and anyone who's not a huge fan of the show, I think that those people are not used to the storytelling of animation, because in animated shows like in the Clone Wars and in Rebels, they kind of follow a similar pattern to what we're dealing with here in The Mandalorian, in the sense that there is a big plot to the whole show. There's an overarching theme that we're exploring, kind of treading back to in each episode, intermittently, usually through the season. And that is addressed in The Mandalorian. It's episodes 1, 2, and 3. And then there's a couple episodes that are more Monster of the Week-esque. They're a little bit more run-of-the-mill in the sense that, this is a day in the life with The Mandalorian. And, the Clone Wars and Rebels were both like that, we would get these big arcs throughout the season and we would explore those, but we would have long bits where we were doing other stuff too, especially in the Clone Wars, which was comprised to be mostly an anthology series at the beginning. It didn't become more cohesive until halfway through the show. And then in Rebels it was cohesive, but they went a long time before addressing a lot of the big premises of the season. So I think that if you're looking for a Stranger Things experience where you can just watch the whole thing in one go and it all makes sense and it all connects to each other and it's just one big movie, I don't think that you're going to think this is excellent storytelling. But from my perspective, I love the day in the life, slow treading of the plot kind of thing. I think that it really works for this show, and it was really cool to see that in Star Wars, and while also tackling some aspects of plot as well along the way. Like I mentioned before, episodes 1 through 3 are very plot heavy in a way, especially episode 1 and particularly episode 3, which I think is probably one of my favorite episodes of the season. I think in order, my favorite episodes go 7, 3, and 8 are really close to each other in terms of how great they are. I don't rank any of them as bad. I think the closest we kind of get to a bad episode would be episode 4, just because it does get very far out of the way in the sense that, like, we do get brought back. There's tons of Baby Yoda. Baby Yoda is so cute in that episode. And we see a lot of humanity from Mando. Cara, who I think is one of the strongest characters in the show, is introduced. So it's not a bad episode. It's just that, like, some of the way that it's written is a little, like, poorly strung together. I felt like they deviate a lot, and they kind of just are like, oh, well, that's a darn shame that we got to walk all the way back to our farm. And then Mando's like, oh, your farm. So it's a little like,
I have spoken.
In terms of the child on the show, I felt like we don't know anything about him still. And that's a good thing, I think, because George Lucas had always intended on Yoda's character to be a mystery. I don't think we're ever really going to know. I don't know if we ever should know, you know?
You know what I'm saying?
Regardless, it is made painfully clear in this show that there is going to need to be something, an end game for Baby Yoda, especially now that Mando is officially considered his father. In fact, if you look up Baby Yoda now, it says that he's a Mandalorian, because the Mandalorians are not a race, they are a creed. I have a lot of questions regarding the change-ups in the Mandalorian creed, for that matter. I know that it's comprised of many houses, and it's not exactly just one succinct thing. We've seen many different portions of it over our course with the Clone Wars and with Rebels, of course, and now here we are with the Mandalorians. It's never been a thing that they couldn't take their helmet off. I'm not writing it as a plot hole. I genuinely think we're going to explore this at some point. I want to say that it's like a thing from where Mando specifically came from, but the Mandalorian that rescues Mando actually in his flashbacks, like we have this one scene that's kind of spread across the entire season of this flashback of when the Trade Federation just totally annihilated Mando's home, and he gets rescued by the Mandalorians. And actually the signet on the Mandalorian that rescues him, it's House Vizsla, or the Death Watch symbol, for that matter. I have a lot of questions. So it's the Death Watch House Vizsla symbol, and that leaves me with a lot of feelings, because, you know, Death Watch is Death Watch. Like, they do bad things, like really bad things, which costs Satine, who's like a very beloved character of mine and a lot of people, to lose her throne and eventually die, basically. But then on the other hand, like, they do redeem themselves. Like, they become less of a terrorist group and more in terms of being against the Empire and everything once they're led by Bo-Katan. And Bo-Katan, of course, she has to redeem herself too. I'm just very curious where all these new cultural attributes come from, because Dave Filoni is involved with this show, and he has been elbow deep in the Mandalorian culture this whole time. So I'm sure we're going to get an explanation. I'm sure it's going to make sense at some point. But right now, I'm kind of scratching my head about it, because there's just so much wonder about it all, and why this particular creed is so different, and what happened since the Empire has taken over. Because that's kind of been my assumption this whole time, that the Empire has clearly had a strong effect, because Mando is no friend of the Empire, is what he makes it very clear from the beginning of the show. He clearly has a sense of morality, and I think this show does a really, really good job expanding upon Mando's morality. I gotta get used to calling him Din Djarin, because that is his name, but in my head, I'm like, Mando. But Din Djarin is his name. We see his face, which it hasn't been, of course, taken off in front of a person yet. So I'm glad that his culture has been respected up until now. I do think we're going to get him taking off his helmet in front of somebody, because I think with this kind of situation, for a character like this, in a time period like this, a compelling storyline is going to be kind of like a loss of faith in a sense. So I think we'll eventually go down that road with him, where he kind of juggles with his Mandalorian faith, particularly if they're running as scarce as we're led to believe they are.
This is the way.
But I think that they do such a great job expanding upon Din Djarin's character, and we see him from the beginning. We know very, very, very little about him pretty much throughout the whole show, but we get this slow progression, and I think I liked that, you know, they don't rely very heavily on their backstories. They give you a little spice of what has happened to him in the past, and why he has such a connection to the Mandalorians, because they rescued him, they saved him, they raised him, you know? So there is a very heavy emotional connection there. And I think that was important because it got the viewer to understand why he holds so strongly to his values. But we've also learned along the way, because we see things in present time, and then of course people who know him say that he's changed, of course. He apparently has a newfound sense of intense morality as far as taking a life. We have yet to get that storyline and why that happens, because we learn when in I think it's episode 6 where he goes to rescue the Twi'lek and everything. And that episode was cool because there was a lot of former tension and camaraderie and everything like that. And like the visuals in that episode are probably the best out of all of them, with that horror-esque vibe. But he spares all those people, and so we learn like a very intense sense of morality. He hates droids. We get immediately why he hates droids, but that is of course reformed in the end when he is forced to trust IG-11, because he loves Baby Yoda and he has this soft spot for kids, which we understand immediately pretty much. We don't see anything of the Doctor again in the end, who had like the mixture of the Imperial and the Camino symbol, which leads a lot of people to believe it's cloning. That theory has already been rejected. I'm okay with that. I think that we don't need more cloning in Star Wars. If they lean that way, that's fine. I kind of like how contained that they've kept it, though, and this mystery around it. So I'm fine with waiting out that mystery of Baby Yoda. I like learning more about Mando more, because I think that the more we learn about him and the more that we peel away the layers of the onion, which it's very, very subtle, but it's very chef's kiss, if you will. Because in episode 1, he's this hardened bounty hunter. In episode 2, you know, he starts to get a little soft for the kid. Episode 3, he goes and he rescues the kid because he just can't bring himself to abandon him, because he was once rescued and he needs to return the favor. Episode 4, he's kind of challenged a little bit in terms of he feels soft for these farmers and these villagers, and he wants to give Baby Yoda a better life even though it hurts him. So he cares about the well-being about him, and he genuinely builds a strong connection with him. Then episode 5 and 6 tell more of that, and it's kind of 5 and 6 are basically he left Baby Yoda alone again. Episode 5 is he left him in the right hands of Amy Sedaris, and episode 6 he unfortunately did not. But Baby Yoda can take care of himself, but he doesn't have to, because Mando, his dad, is always there for him. And I think that this show does a really good job maintaining that lore and still building its own, because like I said, we don't know a lot about what's going on with the Mandalorians and why they're very, enclosed and hiding beneath their masks and everything like that too, and what that means. And the biggest question I have in terms of this show, and I'm so excited about, is that the Darksaber is here. So that is a direct link from the animated shows to the live action shows. And I spent this whole season being like, okay, well, where is this live action character, this formerly animated character that everyone was teasing about, being brought to the live action sphere? And it didn't happen in this show, and that's okay. And it didn't happen in this season, and I wasn't disappointed about it, because the Darksaber is pretty much as good as that. It's this thing that we saw in both Clone Wars and in Rebels that was just so ridiculously cool, and it's such a heavy symbol of Mandalorian culture, because as I stated in my little Mandalorian background video, formerly there was a Mandalorian. He was a member of House Vizsla, the leader of House Vizsla. He became a Jedi, and he used the Darksaber. He built that because he still wanted to stand out and still have his Mandalorian attributes to him, but also be a Jedi. And for a while he brought the two together, but then, the Jedi, he died one day, and the Jedi tried to keep it, and the Mandalorian said no. And now it's like a symbol of leadership in a sense. It's as good as a crown, basically, but it's a symbol of being a warrior. And now the Empire has it, like the Imperial Regiment. And last we saw in Rebels, Bo-Katan had it when she became the Mandalore of her people. And so my question is what happened to Bo-Katan? Did she unfortunately suffer the same fate as her sister? There's a lot a lot of questions here, and while I can talk on and on about how that scene with the TIE fighter is amazing and how they managed to make sandcrawlers look exceptional too, and yeah, they hid the ATST as best as they could because they were like, ooh, this looks bad, we gotta hide this, but Mando's ship looks amazing. Like, we can talk about that till we're blue in the face, and the Darksaber of course looks fantastic, but what does this mean? And I just was like, oh my God, Moff Gideon is a very intense looking man. He's kind of been hiding this whole time. We didn't get his reveal till episode 7. Some people wanted it to be someone we already knew, but I'm more than happy to have different new characters involved in this. It's funny, during that scene with the TIE fighter, and I'm not even joking, I literally said, like, the first time I watched it, I was like, wow, and he was like wrestling on top of the TIE fighter. I'm like, I bet they wish they had a handy dandy lightsaber at this point. And then, of course, the ending happened, and I was like, oh. I think overall, this series has a cohesiveness that a lot of people don't thoroughly understand because it's not what they're used to, but it tells a story, and it brings us full circle in a way. Like, this season was not about discovering the unknown secrets of the Mandalorians, and it wasn't about finding out all the deets about Baby Yoda. It was about found family, and I love that a lot. What I was going to say what I talked about in my episode 8 spoiler-free review about Cara is that what we learn about her is that she's from Alderaan. Of course her beef with the Empire is so intense. Her planet was exploded. And it's funny because in the comics, there's a Princess Leia comic, it was just like 5 issues or something like that, where she tries to get together all of the off-world Alderaanians when Alderaan exploded, just to pretty much preserve that culture as best as she can. And I'm just really curious if Cara was either there or if we're going to get any kind of presentation of the two of them having met. And I would really thoroughly enjoy that, my guys. So, anyway, let me know what you thought of The Mandalorian Season 1. I personally think it's the best thing Disney has come out with Star Wars. I think it's an example of when you have the right people in charge. Give Dave Filoni more things to do, and Jon Favreau, of course. You're going to get better results. And it's kind of away from the main stuff. So we're not really playing with people's favorite characters anymore. We're having new ones, and I love that. Though, bring Bo-Katan and the other Mandalorians and Sabine to this show. I think they belong more than anyone, and I'm a huge Ahsoka fan, and don't get me wrong, I'd sell an arm and a leg to see her on this show or any live action show, but I think if we're going to talk about characters that make the most sense, Bo-Katan and Sabine, Sabine, it's very close, but if Satine lived, that would raise a lot of other questions. Sabine and Bo-Katan need to be on this show. May the Force be with you guys. Have a great day. I was going on a rant. I can't remember what. There's this big shit. The child, of course, in the show. I'm going to stop referring to my shirt. This is so weird. Let's take a look at them.